You going to push, you going to pull, or you going to pivot? That's the theme of today's video, inspired by my recent Strategic Coach workshop in Santa Monica last week. We reviewed a tool in Strategic Coach. They call them a tool created by the founder and the amazing man, Dan Sullivan, where it's the concept of, are you pushing right now? Are you pulling, or are you pivoting? Pushing is obviously when it's time to accelerate. Pulling back is when it's time to maybe, reel things back. And then pivoting, of course, is when it's time to pivot and maybe change course or rethink what you're doing. And in real estate, especially right now in 2025, that could not be more applicable. So let's first talk about accelerating or pushing. Think back to the days of COVID. If that was the time to push for that 2 or 3 year window, you could push by buy as many properties as you can, get them on the market as quickly as you can, because what happened is there were buyers galore. You could sell any property at any time. And so that was the time to push. Maybe when rates were really high, or really, sorry, not high, low and favorable, if it's a buy and hold strategy, that was the time to push, to buy as many rentals as you can, to lever, not as much as you can. I'm not talking about being reckless, but how many people would love to have X more number of rentals at a sub 4% rate right now today? So many different people would be looking to do that. But the hard part with pushing is you don't always know if you're coming up to a period where you need to pull back. So, my recommendation is only push when you have all the resources and available capital and people and manpower to push. If you're pushing and you're always spreading yourself really thin, even in a good market, that is going to immediately turn into a point where you're going to have to pull back or pivot because you didn't allocate the right resources, money or time, attention, whatever it might be. But think of that, of when is the time to push? When is the time to accelerate? When is that time in your market or in the real estate journey? Even maybe when and it might not be the same for other people. Sometimes when somebody is pushing, the other person's pulling back. And I think a lot of that has to do with your resources and the cards you're dealt and the team you have or the strategy that you're employing or whatever it might be. If you're pushing, someone else might be pulling back because maybe they timed things wrong and they just got done pushing. So don't always look to what other people are doing. There might be a general theme or consensus of when it's time to push or pull or pivot. You really got to look at like what resources and what your specific circumstances is. But in general, I think this point's coming home is if you're aware of the market conditions, if you're aware of what's going on, none of us have a crystal ball, but there is a more appropriate time to push versus pull. And COVID was a great example of that. Once everybody realized that rates were coming down, supply was being diminished, and there was scarcity and there were a lot of buyers. There were more buyers than there were houses. Then was the time to push. Now, on the flip side, when is the time to pull? Maybe when the market slows down or you need to reassess capital considerations or there's different trends going on. So maybe it's as simple as pulling back from maybe the luxury market that when you were pushing, the luxury market was always really hot. Maybe it's time to pull back and do more of the first-time homeowner houses. Or it could be the opposite. Maybe there's an oversaturation in the first-time homeowners and you pull back there and it's time to accelerate a little bit more in the luxury market. Maybe it's a time to pull back and instead of taking on all the risk yourself and reaping all the rewards yourself, maybe it's time to pull back and bring in other partners. Spread your risk around. Maybe it's just simply time to pull back and not do as many houses when the market slows down, or maybe when you're limited in capital or something like that. I experienced this pullback during COVID with short-term rentals. I think a lot of people did. Is we used the push strategy to convert a lot of rentals to short-term because, you think back to the behavior back then. There were so many people that didn't want a hotel room or wanted more space. They still didn't want to be around a lot of people. And they could work from anywhere. So destinations, in Utah, we got a lot of people because of the outdoors, the mountains or whatever. So a lot of people started doing short-term rentals. But after COVID kind of ended and behavior got back to normal, my short-term rentals were absolutely garbage. So I had to pull back quickly, and I converted all of my short-term rentals to long-term holds or with long-term tenants. And ultimately that's been better. And probably though, by pushing so hard and then pulling back, I lost a lot of money because I had bought all this furniture that then I didn't need for the long-term rentals. So man, there's always going to be a little bit of an imbalance between your push and your pull, but those are two really good examples of when, you pulled back. Right now I'm considering pulling back, not doing as many big projects and just keeping capital and maybe just trying to pay cash for houses instead of using financing because the market's a little slower, houses stay on the market longer. So if you have the opportunity to pull back, now is a great time to do it. Now, if everybody pulls back, the whole market continues to slow, right? So there's a cause and effect to everything, but be aware of when it's time to pull back. Reminds me of the Kenny Rogers song, The Gambler, right? You got to know when to hold them, know when to hold them, know when to throw them, know when to walk away, know when to run, and don't count your chips while you're sitting at the table. But that's a little bit like the push and pull. And then the hybrid of it is pivoting, changing courses, maybe real time or over a short period of time. For fix and flippers, that might be, and I see this all the time. Some people get so fed up with flipping and, they're like, the wholesaling's so much easier. I don't actually have to remodel the houses. Because maybe you'll learn that you're actually really awesome about finding good deals, but you are not great at executing on the remodel because you don't like that part of it. That's a great time to pivot. You're still staying in the game of flipping or wholesaling. You're just maybe wholesaling now instead of flipping. Or vice versa could be true. Maybe you don't really love finding the deals, even though you're good at it, but you have a ton more enjoyment in actually flipping. So that's a good time to pivot. A lot of times people pivot in their strategy of a flip. Like let's say your flip is done, but the market's kind of slow. I have people that do this all the time. And instead of selling, they pivot to a rental. So you always, with pivoting, ideally ahead of time, you evaluate all your different options so that you can kind of go along with it and then pivot mid-course. Where it is really hard is when you pivot from like a bad strategy to an equally as bad strategy, meaning maybe the flip isn't making money and maybe it actually would be better to just lose a little bit of money and move on, but you pivot to maybe a rental and a long-term loan, but rates are high and then you're going negative each month. If anybody's doing this, has been in real estate for 10, 15, or especially over the course of a few cycles, you're probably nodding your head going, yep, I've done that. Yep, I've done that. I've definitely pivoted where I've taken what should have been a for sale and turned it into a rental. Now, all of the pivoting strategies to a rental will work out if you can maintain and hold on long enough until the market improves. But just be open to pivoting, and there's going to be so many different scenarios where that's going to come into play. Right now, I'm pivoting on some of my rentals. I've had a bunch of rentals for like 10 plus years, and the amount of equity in those rentals versus the rents that I'm getting and the return that I'm getting on my equity, I feel like it's outlived its useful life. And that harvesting of equity, meaning selling the rentals and either 1031ing into a different deal, or even just paying the capital gains and using that cash for something else that I can get a higher return, that's what I'm doing now. So that is an example of a pivot with a long term where I'm reassessing the value of my real estate, the cash flow that's there, and could it be put to a better use? I think it can. In my case, I'm pivoting and doing it. So where are you pushing? Where are you pulling? Where are you pivoting? Hopefully this video is kind of giving you a few different ideas for what really on their surface are very basic and easy concepts to grasp. I'm happy to get on a call and walk through with you the strategic worksheet of push, pull, and pivot, and maybe think through, if you have a unique situation, what you might be able to be doing differently, whether you need to push more, pull more, or pivot more. But keep those 3 Ps, at the tip of your fingertips right now, because it's always a great time to be evaluating where you, not just in real estate, but in life, right? Should you be pushing more on fitness or sleep or pulling back or committing to less things, or do you need to pivot or what? So hopefully you've found some value in this and be aware of when it's time to push, when it's time to pull, and when it's time to pivot.